Okay, so this week we've got two pretty huge figures on the scene of thought, philosophical and political thought, and psychoanalytical thought in the 20th century. Particularly, Lacan in particular would be pivotal for understanding the kind of the post-structuralist thinkers we've been thinking with previously. Okay? The major figure in the lead up to 68 events in Paris. So bear in mind that we're looking at this kind of chronologically. So Freud is probably not really considered to be part of postmodernism, almost certainly not, but he does break certain kind of ways of thinking about structure, of thinking about the mind. But we're thinking Freud, then Lacan as inheriting and breaking away from Freud, carrying on the tradition but also changing it, and then informing the then feminist psychoanalytic approach, which we'll sort of come to in 2 weeks' time. Okay, so bear that in mind in today's lecture. Okay, so as with last week, there's a few sort of questions to consider during the lecture. So firstly, how do you understand the relationship between the ego and superego in Freud's writing? Okay, so we'll start with that. Similarly, then, how do you understand the relationship between the imaginary, symbolic, and real in Lacan's writing? Okay, so just try and understand the terms, and then consider how maybe they relate to one another. And then finally, to consider Lacan's concept of the real in relationship to postmodernity and some of the post-structuralist thinkers considered so far. Okay, so don't be too concerned with having an exact answer, but I think it's interesting to just discuss what your understandings of the terms are and the relationships might be. So, okay, from the beginnings of Western modernity, a defining feature of its view of humanity had been the value given to powers of reason. Controlling authority of the conscious mind had been underpinned since the 17th century by René Descartes' famous philosophical principle, which you've probably all heard, I think, therefore I am, which was an understanding of being, the beingness, at the level of rational conscious thought. But the model of the mind that Freud introduced drastically reduced the scope and powers of this understanding of reason, this Cartesian understanding of reason. In Freud's view, reasoning occurs in the conscious mind, but this is only a small part of the whole. The mind also contains hidden irrational elements, which lie outside the conscious control, but which drive behaviour and influence our conscious lives. So for my art history students, you'll recognise some of these ideas in surrealism, which we looked at a few weeks ago. So Freud's ideas called into question, and this is at the kind of turn of the 19th and 20th century, and then leading up to his death in 1939. His ideas called into question people's ability to act purely on the basis of reason, since unconscious motives or hidden urges inaccessible to the conscious mind are always at work. Okay? They're always at work. The unconscious is always at work beneath the conscious mind. The unconscious has been claimed that the most significant contribution Freud made to it's been claimed that the most significant contribution Freud made to Western thought was his argument for the existence of an unconscious mind. Freud did not discover the unconscious. The existence and importance of unconscious mental life had been apparent to philosophers for centuries. But what Freud did was to greatly add to our knowledge of the workings of unconscious processes. Freud theorized about the nature of the mind and the origins of mental disorders through observations of patients with severe mental disorders and their response to therapy. So he used his own psychotherapeutic practice to inform his conceptualization of the unconscious mind. According to Freud, the unconscious was the part of the mind in which memories and thoughts were held, but which the patient could not know consciously. He believed that problems associated with these memories were hidden or repressed, unavailable to the conscious mind, but having real effects upon the patient. In other words, there is something in us that is alien to our conscious self-identity, irreducible to the I of the ego, and yet influences and even determines our thoughts and actions. But why do we have an unconscious, and how is it formed? The answer for Freud lies in the conflict between our basic state of nature and the demands of life in society, particularly in a so-called civilized society. Civilized men or women learn from a very young age to repress their more natural impulses in order to fit within society. This repression does not eliminate these desires. However, it just keeps them hidden from conscious knowledge. The unconscious is therefore necessary for human life. It acts as a repository for all those thoughts and impulses that are too disturbing for conscious reflection and are thus repressed by the conscious mind, repressed by the mind. Once repressed, however, they do not cease to have effects. Instead, their attempts to find their way into our consciousness are the basis of dreams, irrational desires, and everyday slips of the tongue, as well as the psychological problems that people experience in life. According to Freud, then, the unconscious is a constitutive part of every action undertaken by the subject. This means that the subject can never be fully self-aware, because the rational principles behind his or her thoughts and actions are necessarily supplemented by unconscious drives and desires. Freud's therapeutic technique was to uncover the hidden memories, thoughts, emotions, and desires that influence our conscious life in order to resolve the conflicts and disruptive symptoms they cause. So Freud developed a model of the mind divided into three psychic mechanisms. Firstly, we have the ego, then the superego, and the id. So this is kind of what we're going to base the Freud set part of this lecture around. It's worth mentioning at this point that these Latin terms were not actually terms that Freud used himself, but rather were the translations of the English psychoanalyst and Freud translator James Strachey, who produced the kind of comprehensive translation into English of Freud's works, complete works. Freud actually used everyday German words which conveyed a clearer and more accessible meaning, such as the ich, ewig, and es. So these are his example. Instead of the ego, it's the ich. Instead of the superego, it's the ewig, and instead of the ich, it's the es, which we can translate perhaps more closely as into English as the I, the over I, or more than I, and finally the it. But for today's lecture, I think we're going to stay with Strachey's translation of the ego, superego, and the id. Okay? I just wanted to show you that this was a translation that maybe Freud would not have appreciated quite so much, because he wanted to try and produce a kind of way of thinking about the unconscious, or about the mind, which was more accessible, whereas Strachey produced a kind of understanding which was maybe slightly more sophisticated, too sophisticated. So we'll start with the id. So the basis of our psychological beings is the id. The id is the site of instinctive, sexual and aggressive drives and primary desires. It is totally unconscious and totally unsocialized. It is the thing that we are despite ourselves, and which sometimes seems to take control and push us forward into actions where we do not feel that we have any choice. Okay? So this is kind of the base part of the mind, or impulses and sexual desires. Part of the mind, again, for our history students that Bataille was more interested in, or particularly interested in, the kind of base. So as you see here, it's the site of instinctive, sexual, base, aggressive and primary desires. It is totally unconscious and unsocialized, and it bypasses our conscious agency, seeming to make actions that we do not control. We have the superego. So at the other end of the psyche is the superego. This is in part representative of external authority and external reality. It is our conscious, controlling our drives by suppression and repression, through a sense of morality, guilt, and socialization. We can consider it to be representing influence upon our minds, the standards and prohibitions of our parents and of wider society. These prohibitions and standards are learned from a very young age. So part of the superego is conscious, and we know a lot about what our conscious permits and forbids. However, a large part of it is unconscious, giving rise to one of our most destructive and difficult problems of unconscious guilt, and where this unconscious guilt emerges from. As such, it is in an unconscious screening mechanism which seeks to limit, it is an unconscious screening mechanism which seeks to limit the pleasure-seeking drives of the id by the imposition of restrictive rules. Thirdly, we have the ego. So in between the id, we consider it lying in between somewhere between the id and the superego, is the ego, which is the part of the self that I think of as me. So it's the part of myself that I think of as me. The part which tries to mediate between my internal drives and the requirements of the outside world, or my own sense of conscience. The ego then is the site of agency. If the id is the site where our conscious agency is bypassed, then the ego is the site of our agency. It is the conscious self created by the tensions and interactions between the id and the superego. It has the task of reconciling their conflicting demands with the requirements of the external reality. Freud felt that psychological well-being relied upon the establishment of a harmonious relationship between the three elements which constitute the mind. But more typically, there was an imbalance. In a modern civilized society, the superego tends to overrule our more instinctual desires, since they would transgress the moral sanctions laid down by society. At such times, an inner conflict occurs in our mind. These desires do not disappear, but are repressed into the unconscious. It is also the case, then, that when someone suffers some traumatic experience that is too painful to bear, such thoughts and feelings and associated memories of this traumatic event cannot be banished from the mind, but can be banished from the conscious mind. Thus, they come to constitute the unconscious through repression. The traumatic experience is repressed, because the conscious mind cannot deal with it. Repression is thus one of the central defense mechanisms by which the ego seeks to avoid internal conflict and pain, and to reconcile reality with the demands of both the id and the superego. So, by burying illicit desires or unbearable trauma in the unconscious mind. This is the attempt. However, the repressed instinctual drive continues to exist intact in the unconscious, from where it exerts a determining force on the conscious mind. and can give rise to the dysfunctional behavior characteristic of neuroses. Okay? So these may be neuroses like mental disorders. So even though the traumatic events or experiences have been repressed and the mind tries to bury them in the unconscious, from the unconscious they still have an effect on the conscious mind and on actions. So for Freud, the task of psychoanalysis as a therapy is to find the unconscious repressions which are causing neurotic symptoms, and by bringing them to the forefront of consciousness, to allow the ego to confront them directly and thus to discharge them. This is one reason why dreams possess such a strong symbolic significance for Freud, and why their analysis became such a key part of his treatment. They represent instances in which the vigilance of the superego is relaxed, and when the repressed drives are accordingly able to present themselves to the conscious mind in a transmuted form. Okay? So the dream is a site in which the unconscious can bypass the kind of the control of the conscious. So the unconscious and the repressed can bypass the control of the conscious mind and come to the fore within dreams as kind of symbols or as symbolic imagery. Okay, so I think at this point it might be useful if you turn to your partner, discuss these ideas and how they might relate to ideas previously discussed in the course. This idea of repression, the unconscious and conscious, and how might they relate to ideas of governmentality, for instance, or in the work of family. Okay, so just take a few minutes, or just discuss the actual, how you understand the three terms. Okay, so just take a few minutes. Okay, so I think actually, just the sort of conversations I was hearing a lot of people sort of really understanding these kind of tripartite mechanisms, okay, of the mind. You guys seem to really understand the relationship between the three, okay, and how we have sort of the more than I, superego, being this kind of idea of like socialization, so social rules which occur, right? Which then are both operating at an unconscious and a conscious level. Okay? So you kind of saw that there's a structure where you have the conscious, so you have the ego and the id. So the ego being the conscious mind making decisions, the id being the kind of unconscious, the decisions that you're not aware that you thought or decided to make. And then the superego spanning the two. So it's both how the sort of your social world in which you exist affects both your unconscious and conscious mind. So at this point, I think just with kind of being aware of time, I think it's important to move on to Lacan without spending too much time. But there'll be another moment in which to kind of discuss the ideas. Okay, so we now move on to Lacan. Don't be too afraid of this slide. There's a lot of words on here. We're only going to deal with about 3 of them. So now we're going to turn to Lacan. So we have all these terms: desire, lack, objet petit a, the big other, name of the father, law of the phallus, floating signifier, Oedipus complex, mirror phase, the imaginary, symbolic, and real. Today we're going to focus more on the final 3 here. The imaginary, symbolic, and real. So they're not there, but they're on the next slide. So it is often difficult to discuss any one of this long list of terms without the other, or including many of the others, since all are interconnected for Lacan. But for the sake of time, we'll have to just make some choices. And that is the 3 which we'll move on to and you'll become aware of. So, the move from Freud to Lacan. In the 1950s, Lacan called for a return to Freud. In part, this involved a rigorous reformulation of Freud. In part, it meant a return to aspects of Freud's thinking that had been neglected, such as his discovery of the aggressive drives lurking beneath civilized society. Where Freud's emphasis was on understanding the conscious personality, so the ich or ego, on interpreting its behavior in the light of the workings of the unconscious, Lacan's emphasis was on understanding the unconscious itself as the nucleus of our being. So I'll repeat that. So rather than, as Freud was trying to interpret the behavior of the unconscious mind through how it manifests in the conscious, Lacan's emphasis was on the understanding of the unconscious itself as the nucleus of the being, of our being, to quote Lacan. So Freud's aim was to heal the conscious ego through revealing the repressions of the unconscious in order to produce a healthy ego and thus a subject fit for society. Although in later life he expressed grave doubts about the value of socializing individuals to a sick society. But Lacan expressed a belief in the value of the unconscious itself and doubted the value of socializing individuals to their society. For his unorthodoxy, he found himself expelled from the International Psychoanalytic Association, and instead he set up his own very influential École Freudienne, based upon a system of seminars or extended lectures. In Western philosophy, the conscious mind has been regarded as the essence of the self, expressed in Descartes' formula, I think, therefore I am. Lacan, however, challenges this philosophical axiom by a reversal of these terms into I am where I think not, The unconscious, then, is where true selfhood lies. So I think, therefore I am. It's a kind of affirmation of one's existence because of one's kind of an awareness of one's conscious thought processes. With Lacan, I am where I think not. So actually we reside within our unconscious, okay, the part of our mind which is not thinking in a conscious way. In Lacan's terms, the reality of the human subject barely exists at the conscious level at all. And in fact, so-called reality itself, the conscious world in which we live, is also far from what he calls the real. So rather than trace the ways the unconscious is repressed, Lacan's emphasis on the unconscious leads him to speculate about the mechanisms whereby we emerge as subjects into consciousness. So rather than looking as Freud did at the repression of the unconscious, he looks at the ways in which, almost like the reverse action, the ways in which the unconscious, okay, emerges, okay, and produces our conscious self. He proposes a new triad of terms as key orders of consciousness. The imaginary, firstly, then the symbolic, and finally the real. And it is these on which we will focus today. So firstly, the imaginary. Freud believed that in early infancy, a child perceived no clear distinction between itself and the external world. The symbiotic link experienced with the mother in the womb continues. Okay? So when within the womb, the child and the mother are in a sense one, they're singular. And this singularity is carried over into early life after birth. So the child, according to Freud, still believes that it is one with its mother. Following this period is the state that Lacan calls the imaginary, when the lack of any defined sense of self, separable from the surrounding world, is replaced by our earliest awareness of ourselves as individuals. Okay, so the moment of our separation from the singularity, or production of what we think to be of our individuality. This imaginary is first experienced at what he calls the mirror phase, a key process in the emergent sense of self. The mirror phase is the moment when we first recognize ourselves in a mirror. And on the basis of this recognition, we begin to see ourselves as separate individuals. It's when we first look into the mirror, we start to break away from this feeling of being one with the mother and start to understand ourselves as being a self, being separate. This is a unified, so the unified being becomes separate, yeah? And it starts to enter into the external world, and it starts to become separate from the external world, it becomes individual. In the mirror, the image reflected back to the child is one of wholeness, a complete being. Yet this is a fundamental misunderstanding. The child indeed misrecognizes itself in the mirror, seeing a pleasing unity that it doesn't actually experience in reality. The mirror, then, is like a screen on which we project an imaginary desire for wholeness. It is the first stage in a lifetime of idealized views of ourselves, a projection of who we believe ourselves to be, what Freud calls our ideal ego. Beginning with the image of the self seen in the mirror, the imaginary is a realm of images with which we identify in order to build a sense of identity or ego. What do we say about our homes and the objects within it? Not only that they reflect our interests and tastes, but more essentially that they say something about us, about who we are. For Lacan, the ego is exactly this narcissistic process, whereby we produce a fictitious sense of unitary selfhood by finding things in the world with which we can identify. The imaginary is concerned with surface appearance, which hide underlying structures. These surfaces hide, so these surfaces, this kind of idea of curating the world in which we live, say within our house, which says something about us, actually hides underlying structures. Perhaps this is in part an explanation of our modern obsession for selfies, a means of placing ourselves at the centre of the world around us. Thus, the imaginary is not a development phase that you go through and grow out of. Instead, it remains at the core of our experience. The recognition, so remaining at the core of our experience, the imaginary, okay, is this kind of misconception of our unitary self. The recognition and alienation of the mirror stage is reflected in the ego as a site of conflict throughout one's life in the struggle to attain an imaginary unity and coherence, a unity or wholeness that nevertheless remains an illusion. Okay? It always remains an illusion, this idea of oneself as being completely individual. This is why, if there is one term that could claim to be at the heart of Lacan's theory, it would be desire. Desire is the other side of Lacan's principal theory, the imaginary, that we are born into a condition of lack, which we spend the rest of our lives trying to overcome, following the loss of the original moment of fully satisfied desire, the oneness we felt with our mother. Okay, so for Lacan, this kind of sense of the mirror phase and separation from the mother produces a lack, and a lack that can never be remedied, okay, can never be fulfilled, because we are always lacking this oneness with the mother. Throughout our lives, we may do with unsatisfying substitutes, never able to recover the pure, if fictive, self-identity and self-completion that we experience in the mirror phase. The child will grow into an adult trying to fill the sense of lack, looking for means to fulfill their desire for wholeness and completion. Lacan calls this the search for objet petit a, the small other. This is the object cause of desire. For example, whatever it is we imagine will fulfill our sense of lack, from a girlfriend to a pair of Jimmy Choo shoes to a better-looking body to the latest piece of Apple technology. Okay, so we can consider retail therapy, which I'm certainly guilty of, as being a kind of example of how this lack and this desire to fulfill this lack plays out. Okay? So we buy an item of clothing because we like it, because we believe it's going to fulfill something within us that we lack, and in reality, it can never do that. It can never fulfill this lack. It's just a kind of temporary and not even temporary remedy. So consumer culture operates precisely according to this economy of desire and lack. Even when we attain whatever it was we desired, the desire remains unsatisfied. It's not the object itself that is the small other of our desire. It operates as the object cause of desire. So it's not the object itself, but it's the object cause of our desire. An answer to the lack we assume it will fill but never can. So the object and the desire are never separated. So we now move on to, so we've had the imaginary. We now move on to the symbolic. The symbolic marks a fundamental distinction between the individual as a self and the individual as a subject. If in the mirror phase a sense of the ego's separation from the rest of the world around it produces a singular self, the symbolic phase turns that independent self into a subject of language and of the symbolic order. This symbolic order marks the limits of the human universe. We are born into it, subjected to it, and cannot operate outside of it. The symbolic order constitutes our basic reality. Both Freud and Lacan describe it in terms of the Oedipus complex, through which the individual must pass in order to be properly socialized. In the Oedipus complex, the child's pure libidinal relationship with the mother is broken. The child must begin to recognize that a wider familial and social network exists, of which it is a part. The Oedipus complex marks the transition from the imaginary to the symbolic through the intervention of a third term, which Lacan calls the name of the father, a symbolic position of authority and symbolic law. Okay, so the name of the father represents symbolic position of authority and symbolic law, setting limits to the child's desire and agency. Desire for the mother that initial desire for the mother is substituted by the law of the father, who represents the wider social symbolic laws of socialization. So, in the moment in which one sees the separation from the mother, the idea of individuality, you are then automatically subsumed within the law of the father and into the socio-symbolic laws of socialization of the wider world. Lacan's term clearly derives from a notion of authority as patriarchal, but it also signifies any form of symbolic authority as a big other. Whatever judges our desires and demands our respect, beginning with God, is the ultimate big other, the law of the family, loyalty to the party, patriotism, or the American dream. So acceptance of the law of the symbolic is what Freud called the superego, that self-critical aspect of the psyche that represses desires in the drive towards producing a socialized subject. Freud identified the superego with feelings of guilt, with external pressures to conform to social norms. Thus, the individual's entrance into the symbolic and the development of repressed unconscious desires are simultaneous. So, symbolic you can think about in terms of, that relationship between signifier and signified, that we were talking about many in the beginning of this series of lectures. So that the world is produced as symbolic through language. This is Lacan understands it. Symbolic is always produced through language, through this sort of Saussurean understanding of the signifier and signified. But in Lacan, superego not only controls through guilt and depression, the unexpected supplement to the superego demands that forbids is the superego. Is one's duty to enjoy the received ways of living and thinking that forms the conventional framework of one's society. This is the symbolic. This can induce a sense of failure or guilt when one does not enjoy, does not even have the desire to enjoy. So in modern Western societies, great emphasis is placed on freedom of choice, on individualized desires and the space to be who we want to be. Okay, this is this kind of narrative that we're constantly told about. Okay? This freedom to be who we want to be the individual. Yet all society's energy seems to be directed towards making sure we participate in contemporary culture to the fullest. To be a good consumer, we must enjoy what's on offer. We must find pleasure in work. We must desire what everyone else desires. We must have fun. So every new film is advertised as the must-see film of the year, every new book as the must-read. The inference being that if you don't see them or read them, you are missing out on some vital cultural experience. FOMO. So when enjoyment has become an obligation, we can begin to understand why Lacanian psychoanalysis tells you that you are allowed not to enjoy. Okay? So he sees there being the possibility for too much joy, too much enjoyment. And his form of psychoanalysis offers the possibility to not enjoy. and this is Lacan at his most revolutionary perhaps. In rejecting the reality that forms our common social, political, or cultural framework, we will no doubt seek to create another, which can only be a threat to the existing order. So we move here to the real. Reality as we know it operates according to a symbolic order or social reality. So this is the difference between, be conscious of this, the real for Lacan is separate from reality. The real is the unknown that exists at the limit of this socio-symbolic universe and is in constant tension with it, undermining our sense of reality. It reveals that the symbolic, the symbolic structures of society, the language structures of society, is not the full picture of the world it claims to be. In early Lacan, the real is closely associated with the body, prior to or outside all symbolization, so outside the symbolic order. It's recognizable, for example, in the form of a basic need for food expressed through hunger, which falls outside of symbolic reality. Food, then, is a basic organic animal necessity, is real. In later Lacan, however, the real is that which absolutely resists symbolization. So it's not what falls outside, but it's actually what resists the symbolic order. It is beyond the symbolic and the imaginary and acts as a limit to both. Above all, it's associated with trauma. Freud has spoken of trauma, if you remember, as whatever intrudes into our psychic life and disturbs its balance. It's associated with symptoms like hysteria, paranoia, insomnia, mutism, etc. as the outward signs of an unconscious balance in the psyche. Okay? So these symptoms of trauma, hysteria, paranoia, insomnia, mutism, they are the outward signs, okay, of an unconscious imbalance. So when there's an imbalance in the unconscious, they manifest as these symptoms. Whatever it is that prevents us from successfully functioning within our social world, trauma is what Freudian psychoanalysis attempts to heal. So Lacan adds a different twist to this view of trauma. When Lacan speaks of the real as trauma, it is not as the intrusion of mental ill health, but as the intrusion of the real into so-called reality. So the intrusion of the real is kind of the unconscious, is kind of like the bodily into the structured reality, the rational reality. For Lacan, it is a positive rather than negative event. So that's perhaps a major jump away from Freud. So take the sudden and unexpected death of a parent. It breaks into our safe, symbolic world and disrupts it. Suddenly, the ordinary aspects of day-to-day life lose their importance. So the aspects of day-to-day life, maybe the structures of day-to-day life, such as going to work every day, all of these kind of routines, are radically ruptured by an event such as the death of a parent. It is thus a traumatic intrusion of the real into reality. Later, it is reassimilated back into reality through the symbolic processes of the funeral, so having to organise a funeral and to think about these things. The period of mourning, the rites of memorialisation, and so on. Another example we can see is 9/11, which has been described as an intrusion of the real into the American sense of reality and its image of itself. 9/11 was like a rupture of disturbance in America's symbolic reality. Okay, so this the symbolic reality being the kind of American dream, okay, this kind of universalist dream and aspiration for success. Okay. For a brief time, the nation appeared traumatized, in a state of shock, in the face of this unexpected event. In such singular moments, the need to find a new narrative that offers a perspective of the traumatic events becomes imperative, so that the world can again make some kind of sense. So 9/11 breaks the kind of formal sense that structures of American society produce. Despite claims that nothing would ever be the same again, 9/11 was very quickly assimilated back into political reality, back into the symbolic language of freedom, democracy, terrorism, and so on. Thus, the real is whatever disrupts the symbolic economy of reality, even if it only occurs momentarily. So I'll show a few examples from culture, perhaps where we can identify some of the ideas that we've been discussing so far. And then I'll start to wrap up. So perhaps some of you have seen the film Fight Club. You can perhaps read Fight Club through Freud as a focus, and Freud might read it indeed, and he would focus on its depiction of repressed, unconscious, aggressive desires, symbolized by the fact that it takes place in an underground basement, beneath the level of conscious life, and the main character's projection of imaginary desires into a kind of avatar he produces another self. But the Lacanian reading might see it as an attempt to re-engage with something real, outside symbolically defined reality. The film is the story of a man who's totally alienated from society, an insomniac losing contact with reality and then desperately trying to reconnect. He visits various support groups, but this doesn't work. In the end, he gets mixed up with a group who regularly meet to fight each other. In effect, it is presented as a connection or reconnection with the real. So where therapy doesn't work, he has to reconnect with the real, the base, the kind of body, the instinctual. Even though in the end, so the things that exist outside of the symbolic order, outside of language, outside of the structures of society. Even though in the end we discover that the world he inhabits is largely a projection of his own unconscious, Fight Club is above all a self-violence in search of a real that exceeds ordinary reality. It charts the desire of one individual to access a naked, unmediated real, where pain cuts through the veneer of ordinary reality. So Chuck Palahniuk, the author of the book, describes it as getting back to the bedrock of the real, even if it requires blood, pain, and violence to do so. So to break out the symbolic order. So this is a famous painting that you can go and see in the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. So for my entire life, it's been something that's kind of intrigued me. I remember going as a boy, and what you do is you stand like this to see what's going on at the bottom third or bottom quarter of the painting. So Lacan introduces an interesting image to describe how the real breaks into our world, using this 16th century painting. Holbein's The Ambassadors is a painting representing a symbolic universe. Each element signifies some aspect of the wealth and status of the men depicted. Thus it can be seen as a visual example of symbolic reality. So, symbolic reality existing, okay, in this kind of mise-en-scene, the loot, the globe, all these kind of symbols, okay, this language of wealth within a society. So we can see that most of the painting exists as just a kind of an example, as a kind of visualization of symbolic reality, of the structures of society. But there's something strange about this painting that I've already alluded to, something upsetting this symbolic order. And it operates as an obscene but obscure intrusion. In Lacanian terms, we can call this an intrusion of the real. And as the real, outside all symbolic signification, it cannot be seen or experienced directly. So it cannot be seen or experienced as you see it sitting where you are from your position, okay, which is perpendicularly on to the painting. It can only be viewed anamorphically, that is, from an angle in which symbolic reality itself disappears from view. and in which all these vanities of life become meaningless in the face of death, the ultimate real. When we encounter the real, the traumatic event, then reality loses its meaning and substance. The real is not an external thing that resists being caught up in the symbolic network, but a rupture in the symbolic network itself, a short circuit in our symbolic world. So in moments of tragedy, we often say that it puts things into perspective. We learn what really matters and what is important, or what is unimportant. We literally look at life differently, from a different perspective of the tragic real, rather than the normal day-to-day perspective of symbolic life. In Lacanian terms, tragedy puts things into anamorphic perspective. So, meaning we can see in a way which bypasses the symbolic order represented here. We see the real. And so, I'll start to conclude here. This vital distinction between the real and reality is at the heart of Lacan's ideas. And this is why what we call reality is to him closer to fantasy. But how can it be that reality as we know it is not real? For Lacan, reality is not real because it is fundamentally symbolic construction. Only via an internal intrusion of the unconscious or an external trauma does the real make itself felt. For Lacan, then, there is a vital relation between the unconscious and the real. The predominant perception of the unconscious is that it is the domain of irrational drives that have to be tamed or repressed by the ego, compared to the rational conscious self. By contrast, for Lacan, the unconscious is the site where a traumatic truth speaks out. Thus, for Lacan, psychoanalysis, at its most fundamental, is not a theory and technique of treating psychic disturbances, but a theory and practice that confronts individuals with the most radical dimensions of human existence. It doesn't show an individual how to accommodate themselves to the demands of social reality. Instead, it explains how something like reality constitutes itself in the first place. And here I'll return to those questions at the beginning. So if you just take a few minutes to kind of discuss the questions and try and make sure you kind of have an understanding of the different tripartite